Good evening. Thank you for joining us today at the Copenhagen Fashion Summit's panel on pace versus persistence from a design perspective. I'm Zinya Kuma and I'll be moderating the panel today, which fits into the summit's theme of growth versus persistence. It's going to be a very exciting conversation as we delve into the future of design and sustainability, how designers are overcoming the complex and often confronting forces to drive innovation and create change. And without further ado, our wonderful guests who are joining us today are Jamie McLennan, who is the head of design from Allbirds, Nicole McLaughlin, who is a multidisciplinary designer, Stephanie Grotter, who is VP of Product Insight Strategy and Responsible Design at Target, and Victoria Allen, who is concept designer of ladies denim at H&M. So one of the first questions I have is, when you think of this panel's topic, which is pace versus persistence, what comes to your mind, and do you think pace can be a force for good? So I'll start with you, Jamie.
Thanks for starting with me. It's interesting. Pace, the word versus, I find interesting. I can't help but feel like, at least at Allbirds, those two things aren't in tension. The pace isn't at the expense of persistence. We've got places we need to go fast, and some big long-term sort of commitments, and there's an incredible urgency to get there, and so those two things are actually complementary, at least for us as in our sort of capacity in our space. So
Thanks, Jamie. And Nicole, what are your thoughts on the theme pace versus persistence?
Yeah, totally. I agree. I think they actually go quite hand in hand. Pace could be definitely a good thing. I think it's important that, with the current climate crisis that we're in, we do need to act fast, but also we need to be mindful about our approach, and we don't want to make any too quick of decisions and then compromise, something that could be a long-lasting plan. So we really do need to think about both of those things, but persistence being really top of mind and pushing through, especially in this industry specifically, we really need to be persistent.
Definitely. And what are your thoughts, Stephanie?
Yeah, thanks, Zinya. I would have to say I agree with Nicole. And, what comes to mind for me is the need to really frame up ideas of pace and persistence, within the context of a really clear strategy, one with bold ambitions and an ambitious timeline. And thinking that, that really affords the ability to filter and evaluate trend and short-term opportunities through the lens of a longer-term strategy. And at Target, for us, sustainability is really tied to business resiliency and growth. And, when we make commitments, and I can share more about those later, they're most impactful when they do two things, like one, position a business for the future, but then two, really deepen the relevance and the positive impact for teams, communities, partners around the globe. But that said, being really clear-eyed on how near-term trends impact, your long-term strategy and your North Star, and how might we, as, a community of designers, really leverage trends as signals and inputs that maybe test the resiliency of long-range goals so we know we're on the right path. And then your question about pace being a force for good, I do think personally that it can be, specifically when pace really helps amplify or fast forward a relevant decision, or maybe even make space for bolder actions to be taken that are aligned to those long-term strategies.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Stephanie. And Victoria, what are your thoughts?
Thanks, Zinya. I think everybody has touched on it a little bit already, but the incredible sense of urgency, I think, is something we can't deny. And I mean, we have to transform this industry to work within the planetary boundaries. I think it's sometimes the push and pull of the pace and persistence on a personal level. How does that relate? I think for me, it dials down a lot to the daily work and how I really can work quickly to scale innovations and learnings, and turn around and kind of put them through the lens of our new collections. But also we need the really strong framework that is persistent and driving on the company level, that we have clear strategies and clear goals, that they're actionable and achievable. And I think, a couple of those, we're really working to transition to fully circular product design. And I think that is something on a daily basis I can really say is happening at a quick pace. And then longer term goals like working and having 100% sustainably sourced material by 2030. How do we do that? And I think that push and pull can be really dynamic and interesting, and we have to keep that alive. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to take the leaps we need.
So what are the hindrances that you think are the main factors that, from a design perspective, that hinder sustainability? So what's the number one hindrance you think from a design perspective that is your main hindrance in reaching persistence? Victoria?
Me, I mean, I'm a denim designer, so for me, material is really important. And I focus a lot now on fiber and material through the lens of circularity principles. And I mean, my aim is to try to eliminate as much virgin fiber as I can in our products. But then working with recycled material has some negative effects like durability. And then I want to add in blended fibers, innovation fibers like circulose and refibra, infinite fiber. And those are great. But then when I think about it through the circularity lens again, they're not the easiest to recycle at the moment. The innovation hasn't really caught up. And I think that kind of trade-off that you work with, the complexity of kind of understanding the best decision is not always super easy.
And what are your thoughts, Jamie, on what do you think is the number one hindrance to sustainability from a design perspective, having worked in Allbirds for quite a while now?
Yeah, my answer is the same as Victoria's. It's the complexity, I think, is what's the hindrance. Yeah, it's I think at Allbirds, we want to try and reverse climate change through making better products, and our way of doing that is through measuring and through unlocking the potential of natural materials. I think carbon is our metric for success, and it's quite an abstract sort of thing. It's hard to understand, and it's not as intuitive as things that you might think are intuitive, that tend to be maybe more complex than you might think, you might have thought. So I think the circularity conversation is complex. Recycling, the long-term potential of natural materials versus the short-term efficiency of synthetics. Figuring out sort of where you stand and what your long-term sort of path to reduction is and what your metrics are is important. But but it's just the complexity, and I think in this sort of this growing conversation around all of these things: sustainability, circularity, recycling, regenerativeness. It's even more sort of cloudy than ever for the consumer and even for the sort of the designer. It's not easy, and I think it's sort of figuring out a way to cut through all that. That's so important for designers, and I think having tools to measure is the first step in understanding that.
So it's all about that complexity in reaching sustainable design. And would you agree with that, Nicole?
Yeah, I agree. I'd say like the demand, I think, has completely increased, and so like the way that product has been made isn't really being made to be thought about in the future and like made to last. So for me personally, I think like creating product that can stand the test of time ultimately, can get many uses out of it, also many lifespans. So spanning beyond maybe into fashion and upcycled into other things, which is kind of the world that I'm in, but also being designed to be thought about for the future of it. I don't think previously that has been thought about. I think a lot of the time it was quick solutions for, non-existing problems. And so now we really have to think about when we're designing something, we do it smart, we find the right materials. I think there's a ton of amazing things happening with product innovation, but there's also so much that's already existing on the earth that we haven't really addressed, and we really need to figure out what it is, how we can use it, put those solutions and like those systems in place so we can really find a new way of using those materials.
Yeah, amazing. And Stephanie, what are your thoughts on this? Coming from such a multinational company like Target, which doesn't just have consumer goods in the fashion sector, what are your thoughts on the main hindrance towards reaching sustainability?
I would agree with everything that Victoria, Jamie, and Nicole have said, specifically things around material choice, material availability, durability regarding recycled fibers, etc. And then what Nicole was talking to just about like increased demand in certain places and how you work to pull certain levers. But one thing Jamie touched on too is this idea of some of these concepts being really abstract. And I think, that idea that, we have an innovation gap, yet we still need to continue to take steps, towards more of that unknown is so important. I think sometimes that abstractness, can be a hindrance for helping teams to sort of take those initial steps. But then to your point, as a large, multi-category retailer like Target, we have own brands that range in spaces from food to beauty to electronics to apparel. I would say one of the things that I'm facing in terms of a challenge in the role that I have is how do you be both broad and deep when really establishing long-term sustainability ambitions, and then balancing that with tackling the near-term challenges. So like really just the headline of this panel, right? And all of that just given the scope and scale of the brands and products that we design.
And do you have a particular way of tackling kind of this problem from a design perspective? Do you tend to use like innovation or collaboration or something like that?
Yeah, what we're really working to do, Zinnia, is, we've put out some pretty ambitious goals for 2030, but as we all know, right, that's it's hard to think in those time horizons of 2030, 2040. So really looking about like, where do we aspirationally want to be by those timelines? And then really working backwards and developing like really clear and crisp roadmaps that can help, designers start with the first steps even now in 21 and 22, but with that recognition that we do not have all the answers and it's going to take a lot of collaboration and partnership. But we have a few, first steps in place. And then where can we find synergies across businesses, right? Weirdly, there are some things within beauty that can align directly back to apparel, to food. So we can really create cohorts that are working to tackle similar challenges.
Thank you, Stephanie. And Nicole, I think this is quite relevant for you because you are quite an innovator with the work that you do. How has like innovation and collaboration with companies helped them reach kind of like their sustainability targets with you working with them?
Yeah, I thank you. That's a good question. And I mean, it's been so cool as an independent designer to kind of take a look behind the curtain. I almost sometimes feel like I'm a liaison between big company and consumer, and like I sit somewhere in between. I don't have my own brand, but I have my own practice where I create upcycled pieces, and it's more focused around innovation and exploring new ideas. And then how can I apply that to work with a brand in a larger sense? So I've been collaborating with a lot of brands in the past couple of years just around any of their sustainability goals that they already have, or helping to implement new ones into, their already operating systems. So it's been really interesting to see. I'd say like my favorite piece about it is brands that are open to talking about sustainability. I think like Stephanie, that was a really great point that you said before, but it's really just acknowledging that you might not have all the answers, but you're willing to try to just collaborate and come together and talk about it, instead of maybe coming up with a really great solution and then keeping it all to yourself, because that's really not how we're going to be able to push the industry forward. And something I've really loved learning about more was brands that have some type of take back program, and them acknowledging the fact that they have already produced so much stuff and put out into the world, and then taking responsibility, like what can we do with those pieces? Like, can we help you after your journey with our product is over? So I think those are all things that I'm really looking forward to continuing to work on, but there's so much potential like with any brand to be able to do those things.
Interesting. And Jamie, having worked with shoes and innovating with a lot of shoes and kind of new fabrics and that kind of thing, how important is innovation and collaboration in helping companies incorporate and reach their sustainability targets?
I think it's essential. I think we have to do this together. It's especially when you're a smaller company like we are relative to the Targets and the H&Ms of the world. Just to scale our impact, we have to collaborate, and I think also just to have be honest in our and have integrity in what our stated mission is. We also have to share and collaborate. And I think a great example of that is our partnership with Adidas. Recently this year, we're around the lowest carbon high performance running shoe. Somewhat counterintuitive, but two footwear brands that could be maybe seen as sort of competitors coming together and trying to solve something using a shared knowledge and a cross-pollination of technology and so on. So I think it's critically important, and quite frankly, it's exciting. The idea that it is not what you would sort of traditionally and consider doing with competition. So yeah, I
think that's incredible. Working with what would traditionally be called a competitor and kind of overcoming a challenge together to I guess create an innovation that wasn't there before. So what are the challenges that you've come across that come with scaling innovation?
I think the challenges are that unlike being smaller, the sway we might have with a partner in a material or a processing innovation can sometimes be seen as a negative. But on the flip side, we're small and nimble and have that pace that we can often bring these innovations to market quicker and sort of prove them out. And I think so there's two sides to it really. And I think our model of sort of open sourcing these types of innovations, I think can work around some of that that what might be seen as a negative of our current scale. And we see the open sourcing as a benefit in that it makes new innovations more accessible to everyone, including us. And ultimately, probably accessibility also means better probably better costs for the industry as well. So there's always we managed to sort of flip it to our advantage. What might otherwise be seen as a constraint or a negative.
Amazing, thank you. And Victoria, I'll go back to that original question that I've asked everyone. So how important is innovation and collaboration in helping, I guess, companies to incorporate and reach their sustainable targets, especially coming from H&M and working with such a huge, I guess, clothing sector as well? So yeah.
Well, I think, brand collaboration is super important. Need to share knowledge and best practice. And I think sustainability shouldn't be treated as a competitive edge, because I think design is actually the competitive edge. And I think if we can reframe that a little bit, we actually can get a lot further. Last spring, we worked together with Lee denim brand, and that was really exciting for us because we got to share expertise amongst a lot of denim lovers, but we also had the same values around change. So we could take what was the strengths of our brands and kind of bring them together and really push the innovation and push the inspiration around it and make the boundaries a little bit easier to reach. And I think the result was pretty fun because it was the first time both of our companies produced 100% recycled cotton jean. And that's a milestone. And we were really excited. I don't think we could have done it alone. We did it together. So collaboration is really important.
And is there any challenges that came with this kind of scaling of innovation from kind of this small scale with Lee to being incorporated into the work that you do?
Scaling innovation is time consuming. It requires a lot of investment and engagement. But I do think that investment doesn't only come with a money investment, it also is resources and people, and kind of bringing that out into the supply chain is really important for us right now. We need to kind of lift up all the parts of the chain in order for us to progress forward. And one of the examples, it's a different example, but really speaking about innovation and scaling innovation, we worked really closely with one of our suppliers for a collection that's coming next month. It uses innovation fibers and it uses innovation washes. It's part of this jeans redesign that Ellen MacArthur has set out. And that was a turning point because we were adding things together within the innovation sector that we really weren't sure if we could achieve the goal that we set out to do. We had to kind of walk hand in hand with the supplier and say, we're taking these risks together, we might not actually achieve the goal, but the learning curve, we're both going to be on it together. We're in it for the long term. We want to go this direction. We need to do the legwork here. And I think we did end up being able to achieve the goal, but it was not easy. I mean, we had a lot of unknowns kind of coming together. And I think that unpredictability is nothing anyone feels comfortable with, but you have to do it when you're working with innovation and trying to do it at a big scale. So it's challenging, but it's worth the payoff. I mean, we have to do the leaps now.
And Stephanie, any thoughts from you about the challenges that come with innovation?
Oh, yeah,
scaling.
Yeah, I love what Victoria said too about sustainability not being like a competitive advantage, but really leaning into design and creativity as competitive advantage. And I wholeheartedly agree. And, I think innovation and collaboration are critical when we think about how helping companies incorporate and reach sustainable targets, especially since these challenges that we are all facing are similar. They're really large and they're so complex. For Target, one of our big ambitions is for 100% of our own brand products to be designed for a circular future by 2040. And while that's a long ways off, this is across 40 brands, multiple industries and categories. And it's a huge goal. But I think one of the things we're trying to do is challenge ourselves to enlarge the definition of consumer and collaborator to include sort of the broadest set of stakeholders, which open up like new opportunities for collaboration, partnership, and solving for unmet needs. While anchoring to that longer term goal. And, similar to what Victoria talked about with the Lee partnership and Jamie talked about with the Adidas partnership, we're doing the same things and really looking at some of our competitive set and the way that we can collaborate. We are a founding partner of the consortium to reinvent the retail bag, which is a multi-year effort alongside other leading retailers in the US and closed loop partners, Center for the Circular Economy. And this is really all about reimagining the plastic retail bag. And we've narrowed down to 9 designs that really still look to deliver convenience for consumers, but reduce plastic waste. And we're actually starting to pilot some of those in our stores, and then some of our competitors are piloting them as well. And so I think with the next step, when you think about the challenge of scaling that is like, that's still in an incubation stage, right? And so in big companies where you're used to sort of setting an idea and following through and getting it to shelf, innovation has a lot of stops and starts, and it has a lot of iterations, and it has a lot of failures. So getting people really comfortable with the idea that not everything is going to work out, but to what Victoria said, we have to keep trying and then be collectively realistic about the challenges that we have to overcome to scale, and then align together on how we begin to solve them.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. And actually another question for you, Stephanie, is how do you balance the pace of these long-term goals that you set with stakeholder influence trends and targets, especially when they're not always aligned with what, I guess, your long-term goals are?
Yeah, that's a great question. This past June, we announced Target Forward, which is our new sustainability strategy. And the goal is to put our business to use to positively impact people and planet. And what I love about it is it builds on our overall purpose as a retailer to help all families discover the joy of everyday life. Which allows us to really be grounded in a vision to create an equitable and regenerative future with our guests and our partners and communities. And what I do love about that is that it really has the ability to influence, every corner of our business and deepen the collaboration with our partners while being fueled by the strength of the kind of total target, and really harness that for change and for good. And what I like is that becomes a super powerful set of criteria for decision making. And it creates the space for designers to ask really tough questions regarding trend, and creates the space for innovation and creativity to respond to trend, in a manner that's really fueled by the vision and the goals. And I think it creates a rubric, right, for teams to use to really evaluate everyday decisions and create even more space for innovation and creativity. So sometimes it's actually really exciting when the trends aren't in alignment, because it just presents an even greater design challenge that that I think, especially when we look at like future designers and a lot of our talent that's coming out of schools the last like 5-6 years, they're really ready to take it on.
Thank you. And Victoria, what are your thoughts on long-term targets that don't always align with what you've set versus what stakeholders want? And is there a way for you to say no as well when that happens?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because we actually believe our stakeholders, the most important ones, are our customers. So, I mean, those stakeholders for us, we just want to be credible. We want to walk the talk when we set our strategies. We want them to believe in us, that we are fulfilling them. And the way that we have really kind of done that is that we've worked together with key stakeholders like scientists, experts, academia, think tanks like Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And we want that credibility and that possibility to be real. So we want the consumers, when they come in and they see sustainable products offered by us, that they really engage in that, and they know that it's coming from a true and real place. And we work with those partners the whole way while we implement our strategy to make sure that if things need to be adapted, that we can do that in a clear way, based on real data, not just trends necessarily, and that we can just keep our commitments. I mean, it's a little bit of a different answer maybe than Stephanie, but it is really important for us to be credible in our progress.
Interesting, thank you. And this one's for you, Nicole. So how does consumer demand inform your design? So, and would this be affected if there was, for example, a paradigm shift in the world and consumers all of a sudden decided to consume much less and away from seasonal trends?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an interesting question because I don't sell things, so I don't really feel like I have like a consumer demand, but I definitely have the audience who are consumers. And so that's something that I really like to try to capitalize on and focus more on the educational aspects of what I do. And so a lot of what I do is just kind of problem solving and coming up with concepts and solutions for, you know, issues that we might face. So more of my focus goes into teaching and kind of showing people, you know, through doing workshops, through showing these concepts on social media and beyond, just like what the possibilities are of the things that they have in their lives. And I think the education part is really key, especially with younger people as they are taking kind of the reins on, you know, design in the future, just kind of showing the best practices and like what the possibilities are while working with some of these larger companies or working within an organization. And something I really always love to teach is just like the value of what it takes to make something. And when you have the, you know, the appreciation for what it takes to produce a garment or produce an item, your value of that piece immediately goes up, so that when they are buying something from a Target, from an H&M, from an Allbirds, they want to keep that item in their lives as long as possible, and then to even repair it or find another solution for it afterwards. That's really more of the goal, and less of like creating more of a consumer habit. I always say, like, not everything you see on the internet needs to be purchased. So.
And Jamie, how does consumer demand inform your design? Or does it? Or are you kind of not affected by these kind of like seasonal trends that affect kind of perhaps brands more like Target and H&M with?
Yeah. I think we have a kind of a different perspective on how we bring things into the world. We have a kind of a restraint and we want to solve problems, and we want to solve them once and then move on to the next problem and not re-solve the same problem over and over again. But that said, freshness and retaining interest is important. So there is an element of that, but we tend to do that through through color and through partnerships and through different more subtler means, rather than, like I say, just sort of solving the same problem again. So we're a lot more restrained. And I'm fascinated by what you said about a sort of a paradigm shift as well, and just this idea that like we shouldn't take for granted that there's always going to be a demand for our product, especially if it's not better. And I think the ultimate future for us is one where our products are sequester more carbon than they release in the manufacturing process, and so therefore you can actually indulge in your desire to consume whilst effectively sinking carbon into this object. And And that's one way of looking at it. I think we've actually worked with Nicole on some speculative sort of pieces, and I think it's super exciting to also think about these massive sort of feedstocks of materials that exist, in our current model, and like putting those to work is fascinating. Both aesthetically, but also because we measure things, you very quickly start to realize that the carbon was paid for somewhere else on the life of that object. And so, in many cases, for us to reach these goals that that we need to reach, we can't keep offsetting for the that's we need to drive carbon out. And so it's quite interesting when you start to think about them as a raw material as well. So yeah, it's cool to think about all these possible future scenarios, and also just not be complacent and thinking there's always going to be this sort of demand in this current model.
Amazing, thank you. I'm going to move ahead forward to our final section. So this is kind of like more about future outlook. So I'm going to split you kind of into two groups. And Jamie and Nicole, you both have circularity integrated into the way you operate and would possibly be considered slow fashion. And Stephanie and Victoria, you come from larger and more fast fashion backgrounds who are now implementing circularity into your business models. So what is it that we can learn from each other? So what can fast fashion learn from slow fashion? So it's the work that more Jamie and Nicole and kind of that whole sector is doing. I'll start with you, Stephanie.
Sure. Zinnia, what I love about the work that Jamie and Nicole are leading is that ability for, quote, slow fashion to ingrain sustainability so effectively into the cultures of their respective companies. It's really powerful. I get the sense that there's an energy and belief that innovation and sustainable design innovation can come from everywhere and from everyone within their organizations, and that it's really an expected behavior. And I find that like positively infectious. And what I think larger organizations can learn from that is that there's a huge opportunity to lean into innovation as a key behavior to drive sustainability goals. One which everyone can model and be responsible for, and that it can really shift the perception of sustainable design problems from ones that, quote, like we have to solve, to problems that we actually have like the joy and the honor to solve. And for me, like thinking about that scale of behavior shift is really exciting, and definitely look forward to connecting with more with Jamie and Nicole here, because I think when you hear and see their passion, that it's radiating through their organizations, and I think that's really great.
Amazing. And Victoria, what have you got thoughts on about what you can learn from each other?
I mean, the big takeaway that I have just instantaneously as a creative myself is that I love the fun to the creative process, that bringing in reimagining, reinventing, repurposing, the determination to nail the details. Those are things as a creative that I really get inspired by. As a company, H&M is a big player, so we have a big responsibility. And I think the thing that I can take away is that we need to be consistent, and we need to be transparent with what we do, how we do it, and be a consistent, have that consistent progress clear. We need to be responsible for that. And that's my biggest takeaway.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Victoria. And what can we learn from fast fashion? Jamie?
Well, I feel like it's maybe more of an insight to people not on this panel. Quite honestly, I feel like hearing Stephanie and Victoria talk, I feel like you guys get this. So this is not to you, but I do feel like as a small, call it slow, although I think that's we're trying to go as fast as we can with aspirations to be big. I think we've had the luxury of being able to sort of build this thing in a new form from scratch. And the one thing that just sort of sticks to me, as we're a panel of people in the design space, is just how designing, what I'm so excited about is I see this other shift happening within the studio here at Allbirds, which is designing to carbon, understanding how to measure and using that as a metric or a constraint within the design process is so exciting. And I think it just adds another lens to the the what is just it, what am I saying? I've completely lost my thread here, but it's
all good.
just like using carbon as a every step of the way. It's in our briefs, it's in the decisions, it's in the way other people within the team are questioning, like, why is that detailed? What's the cost of that? What is the, like it ultimately produces a better result. You can't argue with it, and I think it's going to throw up some really interesting solutions visually, and and it's going to be the way forward. And I just think, and I feel like everyone's on this journey. We're already sort of thinking in this way, but I just feel like that's one for the people listening. It's just there is a new way of designing, and I'll leave it at that.
Amazing, thank you, Jamie. And Nicole, final question for you. So, what can we learn from the fast fashion model, and are you hopeful about the future? And what are your thoughts?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'd say like the biggest question that I get as like a smaller independent designer, it's like, how do you scale what you're doing? And I almost feel like this could be a lesson, like, do we really want to try to scale things even more? So I'd say, from taking away from larger fashion brands, like for me, it's just a lesson in itself for, younger designers and designers that are just trying to like get their footing. Do things the right way from the start. I'd say, like, we have a lot of resources available. Please try to use them. And yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful because I'm an optimist, but I think that there's a lot of amazing innovation and conversations that is happening already, and we just need to really continue doing that. But yeah, just being mindful of your own personal consuming habits and how big do you really want to get.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Nicole. Thank you everyone for joining us today on this panel. And I guess some of the summaries and the takeaway for this panel is that overcoming sustainability is a very complex problem, as we've learned from everyone, and the different elements that come into it, particularly carbon, circularity, and also cycles and where items are being sourced from. Pace is not always a negative. In fact, we are not reaching and providing climate solutions fast enough. And we have to be selective and focused on reaching our commitments. And also, it's really important to be efficient in contemporary circular companies and incorporate carbon reduction and circularity into the company culture. And we need to reduce waste and carbon from the very beginning of the design process. And we've also learned that innovation cascades through all levels. So thank you very much, and thank you for joining this panel. And yeah, that's all.
Thank